Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force. I am your host, Sarah.
And I'm your host, Brad.
And on today's episode, we have a really exciting episode for you because Brad and I have been reading a certain High Republic Tales of Light and Life. And there was a certain tale that had me screaming, crying, throwing up, but silently because I was in a public library. And that was A Closed Fist Has No Claws by Tessa Gratton. Okay, if you haven't read it, hit pause, do it right now, and then come right back. This is a very serious business. And now this is not, Tessa's first story or anything like that. We took this opportunity of us screaming, crying, throwing up silently in the public library. I'm just adding you into this, Brad, even though you weren't even there.
I was there in spirit.
To call up Tessa via email, as you do, since we're not personal friends, and be like, hi, we really love your work. Please talk to us about it. And Tessa said yes. So this is a long-winded way of saying that we are so excited to have Tessa Gratton on the pod today to talk about her story, A Closed Fist Has No Claws, in Tales of Light and Life by various authors, as well as talk just a little bit about A Path of Deceit and all the other things she has written, Quest for Planet X, etc., etc. Things in the future that we can't really talk about, but we can allude to.
Yeah, and all the things they have upcoming, like Defy the Storm, which is another book she'll be writing with Justina Ireland once again, co-writing, as well as Temptation of the Force, which comes out next summer, and that's a Del Rey novel, and it's going to mess us up internally, and I know it. I think,
honestly, we're under, we say this because it's Elzar and Avar and, the trio, except it's not a trio, it's just a duo anymore. It's fine. Don't talk to me. But I think we underestimate the amount of how messed up we're going to be after Defy the Storm. Maybe this is a conversation for another time, but Path of Deceit had us feel it a certain way by the end of it, which was what?
Yeah.
And so I think Defy the Storm is going to have the same energy because it's a lot of characters that we love too. So I'm really looking forward to both of those books quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a testament to how Tessa was brought into the High Republic for Phase 2, and she's made such a mark ever since then with, again, Path of Deceit with Justina Ireland, Quest for Planet X, which is the middle grade novel, and Tessa also wrote Masters, which is a part of another anthology, Stories of Jedi and Sith. So this is their second anthology they've been a part of. So I'm just really grateful that Tessa's a part of the High Republic and coming into it with such a strong portfolio of writing already. I'm just so excited to see where that work continues. And I was we were just so honored to have the chance to talk with her today about this short story specifically, as well as everything at large. So really, really just excited for all of you to hear it now. It's such a great conversation. We hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, Brad, you've set up that transition for me so wonderfully. Thank you so much. Transition King, we have to stand. So without further ado, let's jump into our interview with the one and only Tessa Gratton.
Tessa, welcome to Friends of the Force. We're so happy to have you, and congratulations on the release of your newest short story in the High Republic.
Thank you. I am so glad to be here and very excited to talk about the short story. It's one of my favorite things I've written for Star Wars, so I'm glad it's out in the world now. I'm
really excited because I'm just ready to yell about it with everybody. So I'm glad we get to have that time with you today to just be super excited about it because when I was reading it by myself, my notes were lots of aggressive all caps because I was enjoying it so much. But before we jump into the story, I would love to just kind of get a little bit of background on your history with Star Wars and what brought you to this universe as a fan.
Oh, absolutely. It's a really easy answer because it was my parents when I was 3 years old. So both of my parents were huge Star Wars fans. They, saw the original trilogy when it came out. And one of my earliest memories is going to see Return of the Jedi when I was 3 or 4 years old at a drive-in movie theater in California where we lived at the time. And I usually would sit in the back with my little brother, and we would like make a fort and just play back there with our toys while our parents watched the movie. But Return of the Jedi just hooked me in. And I was so obsessed with the murder teddy bears. My mom said that for like months, I was so obsessed with Wicket that I stopped answering to my own name, and I only answered to the name Wicket. And I got like teddy bear pajamas and everything, and pretended they were Ewok pajamas. So basically, I've been Ewok cosplaying since I was 4 years old.
Legendary. I love that.
That's amazing. You're gonna have to go to like full Ewok costume at a celebration one day. It's gotta happen.
That would be great as long as it's in a cold place.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You just got to bring it back to Chicago in April,
Right.
and it'll be good. It'll snow the whole time. It's fine. So we got a bit of background on your introduction to Star Wars, but in terms of becoming an author and writing stories, where did that path kind of start for you, and how did you discover your knack and passion for that?
I've always, as long as I can remember, written stories. Usually, I would write what I called a novel when I was 10. It was like 16 pages long. I was like, Mom, Dad, look, this novel I wrote. And it was always fantasy stories, stories about dragons and magic and wizards, which to me, Star Wars always fit into because of the Jedi were basically space wizards, and they had their magic and everything. I didn't think that I was going to be an author. When I was younger, I didn't really know that that was a job that a person could have. Um, it wasn't until I was in graduate school where I was getting a degree in gender studies and intended to go into like politics. I was going into gender and policy and all this kind of stuff. And I realized that politics were turning me into a total monster. Like I was just angry all the time, fighting all the time, like driving all my friends and family away. And I just had to have this like, okay, you cannot do this, Tess. You have to totally pick a different life path. Even though you've been working toward this for like 6 years, you have to do something else because you want to also be a good person. And I thought, okay, well, the goal of going into politics was to make the world a better place, was to try and fight for justice. And I realized slowly that what made me want to do that in the first place was both how I was educated by my parents and the kind of priorities they gave me to seek justice, and then the books I read when I was a teenager in particular that made me rethink the world and different worlds and ask questions the way the best science fiction and fantasy does. And so I thought, I can do that. I love to write. Maybe I should write books for teenagers like me who need some questions asked and a safe space to explore really difficult topics. And so that's what made me decide to try and become a professional writer. And I gave myself 5 years and a lot of rules about how I could do it because I'm a very like type A personality. And I, set these goals, and almost 5 years to the day, I sold my first book.
Yeah, I love that you set the goals and then you achieve them in the
Yep.
time frame. It worked. I have
It
to say
did.
that as somebody who majored in history and poli-sci with a minor in women's and gender studies, I relate heavily to that story. So yeah, saw a lot of that what I'm going through currently as a young
Mhm.
adult. So joining the High Republic, not your first Star Wars story, but kind of first entry into the High Republic in Phase 2. What was joining this initiative like, and co-authoring Path of Deceit with Justina Ireland, another book that we just adore, which ultimately brings us to the short story.
Yes. Um, it was really exciting and really weird. Like, to be perfectly honest, it was so weird because I've been a Star Wars fan for so long. Um, but it really never occurred to me to try and write for Star Wars. I read all of the Legends books when I was a kid and a teenager. And then I just, I never really got back into it as an adult once I was a professional writer, despite the fact that a lot of my peers were writing for Star Wars in a variety of ways. And so when it was Justina's idea. She made me do it. And I was very excited to do it. She has known that I've been a Star Wars fan for a long time. I believe I was the first person she told when she was originally brought into the High Republic project. Secretly told me she wasn't supposed to, but she was like, I have to tell someone who will understand and care. So swore me to secrecy. And I got to be really excited for her. And then we have been writing and working together. Like we read for each other and have for several years, and like give each other critiques and things. And we've been talking about writing a book together for a while. And we were kind of pulling that together, which would eventually be Chaos and Flame, which also just came out, which is a fantasy novel we wrote together. Um, but Justina really, really, really wanted me to write Path of Deceit with her. Like she knew it was exactly up my alley. All my YA books are about, I mean, basically about like girls and gender fluid people becoming monsters and weird religion and magic and all these things. And she was just like, oh my gosh, Tess will be perfect to write this book with. And I was really flattered and excited. And then the real process started, like the real onboarding, which was basically I was sitting in my backyard, like super sweating because it was really hot, but I felt like I had to be outside when I got on the phone with Mike Siglain for the first time. And, he was just like, hey, Tessa, I think we talked about Star Trek for a little while. I don't remember why. And I was just like, what is happening? What's going on? But it was a really wonderful conversation that I had with him. And it was really like straightforward and simple after that. Like just working with Justina predominantly at first because that was easy and normal for me working with Justina. And so she was really my contact point for what we were supposed to be doing with Path of Deceit and what we wanted to add to like the very brief outline of things that really had to happen in the story. So it was a very dynamic and fun process of coming up with the details and the characters and that kind of thing. So, yeah. Did I answer the question?
Yes. Yes, 100%.
I'm always super excited to talk about working with Justina.
Well, we're here to hear it because we also are big fans of Justina, and we of course love Path of Deceit. I convinced a friend to also get into the High Republic, which they've now loved, and they just finished Path of Deceit, and they like sent me that one gif of Adam Driver like putting his fist into the wall in Marriage Story, like, gosh, the ending of this book. And I was like, I know, it's amazing. It hurts.
Yeah. That was the ending, one of those things that was like non-negotiable from the beginning. So
you should know that speaking of like the politics thing, I finished the book while waiting in line to vote. And so here I am like in line to vote, listening to the audiobook and following along and writing in my copy. And all my notes are like, oh my God, no, I can't believe this. and then I had to vote and then I finished it. And I was like, the pain I feel.
I remember the voice messages Sarah was sending me like while she was in line. It's like, I'm in a public space right now. What is going on? But amazingly, it's not going to be the last time you two work together because you have Defy the Storm coming as part of the start of phase 3. So we cannot wait to get more Justina Tessa writing together. It's amazing.
Yeah,
so
we just locked that in this week. So it's done.
Huzzah. Congratulations on finishing
Thank
it, making
you.
it happen. We look forward to it.
I'm looking forward to people being able to read it also.
Yes. Oh my gosh, we're highly anticipating phase 3, so we cannot wait. But speaking of like phase 2, so you got to write Marta Rowe not only once but twice. Kevin kind of slid in there for a
Mhm.
minute, wrote Path of Vengeance, and then you pick up the pieces of Marta Rowe's life in A Closed Fist Has No Claws, which is the short story that we're here today to talk about. And like Sarah said, we were both freaking out. I was freaking out. I tweeted my reaction to it, and Sarah tweeted her reaction to it. And we're like, we need to get Tessa on the show immediately so we can yell about it. Amazing, amazing. What was it like returning to Marta Rowe after getting to write her in Path of Deceit? And not only Marta Rowe, but a very changed Marta Rowe. You know, somebody who went from being very pure of heart to now sitting there in a white space flight suit with Jedi blood splattered all over her. Like the juxtaposition of like, you know, this pure-hearted individual who's now been corrupted by her deeds along the way.
Oh, it was really, I mean, on one level, I felt really possessive of Marta because um I like originated the details of her character by writing her point of view in Path of Deceit. And I was really always fixated on how psychologically is she going to go from what we're building at the beginning to someone who can, for all intents and purposes, found the Nile. And I really was happy with a lot of the imagery that was in Path of Vengeance. When I first started the short story, I had only had a chance to read an early version of Path of Vengeance, also just because of the, the writing and the publishing schedule with Star Wars is very fast. um, and like Cav really gave so many like little seeds of um, Marta's like I guess triggers is a good way to put it, and what she would be triggered into doing, like this like instant feral quality that she had. And so I was excited to really dig into that and look at, well, where did that come from, and like both psychologically and also like she's always needed a mythology. Marta had a mythology that was given to her by the mother, and then that was shattered by, mostly betrayal. But, she would pick up the pieces by creating a new mythology. And I really was excited to um, delve into the Evereni lore itself and to like use that as a way to sort of shape Marta and let her shape herself in a really like messed up, unhealthy way that would be like ultimately satisfying to me and readers, hopefully. So yeah, there was a lot, and I was very excited to get to do it.
You made a really compelling choice, like right off the bat, in writing this story in like second person as it is to someone. Can you talk a little bit about that choice? I think it's like the first time we've seen it in the High Republic for sure, but I think perhaps the first time I've seen it in Star Wars that I've read.
I There was sort of like an unspoken like assumption that Star Wars books are all going to be in third person. That's just how they are, which is fine. You can do a lot of really cool stuff with different kinds of third person. But YA, especially YA fantasy, is predominantly first person, or at least has been in the decade that I've been um, working with YA fantasy a lot. And I actually tried writing A Closed Fist Has No Claws in third person initially, out of habit mostly, because that's how you write a Star War. Um, and I was like, well, this is fine, but it was pulling to fairy tale. My like personal authorial voice tends to be very fairy tale esque. And um, that is something that I've had to curtail and had, Justina has had to make me curtail when we're writing these novels together because I get very dreamy and distant sometimes in my voice. And it was not working for this short story. I could have written the whole thing like a myth, as a fairy tale, like the fairy tale of the founding of the Nile or of, Marta's becoming a villain. Like that would have worked for a fairy tale, but it wasn't raw enough for ever any. It was too distant. And, the best things I think the best ever any moments that we've had so far are really much more of like gut punchers. And it's like, oh no, this is dangerous and immediate. And so I really wanted that immediacy and intimacy of first person. Um, and I have to be perfectly honest, I cannot remember what made me start the start with the second person. I think that it happened in the middle of a draft that it was just like, you know what? Marta needs to be telling this to someone. And so maybe here should be a scene where she's like actually recording this, in the scene, deciding to record this and talk about her legacy and what that means to her and everything. And as I was writing it, it just sort of like galaxy brained and I scrapped the whole thing again and started writing it the way that it is written now. And once I started doing that, I think I wrote the whole short story in like 2 days after, a couple of weeks of false start.
Yeah, it was really incredible because it was just such a bold choice and one that worked so well, I think, for this specific story. And thinking about it in the context of like who is possibly reading or listening to this recording. Is it Marcion? Is it Marcion's dad? Like who could it be? And I think it can really be anybody that you want it to be, because the rows are a long line of people. And
Mm-hmm.
I just love that like stream of consciousness, sort of chaotic method of how she is telling about her legacy, as she's walking through the actions that she's taking to form the seeds of the Nile,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty incredible. Like, was it really fun to just play with that and plant those seeds, knowing what we know about the Nile in phase one, and now being like, oh, here are some of the ideologies like kind of taking root within Marta Rowe and what will be passed on to like her future kin.
That is one of my favorite things about phase two is being able to really play with how slippery history can be and what actually happens versus what people 150 years think happened versus what people tomorrow think happens. Like Marta is not a reliable narrator, and so for a very unreliable narrator to be like telling her own history and also telling her own future in a lot of ways was a really meaty and cool. And I liked that about everything we were doing in phase two. I loved it in Path of Deceit, partly with the different conversations about the Force in particular, but then also in Quest for Planet X, really getting to delve into the hyperspace prospectors and like how that all works and what that has like setting seeds for some things that are going to happen in phase three. This is where it gets delicate. I'm trying really hard not to say anything I'll get in trouble for. But there's a lot of like hyperspace issues in like phase one, obviously, that will continue into phase three, and getting to really like showcase like hints about maybe how some of these things are going to develop and how the galaxy as a whole is developing and point arrows like that. And it was especially exciting to do it with Marta because the Nile are so important, and then you have Markian and he's just like this iconic um really intriguing villain who's really hard to pin down. Like his motivations are really hard to pin down, um, as both readers and as writers sometimes. Um, and so I liked being able to maybe forecast some things that maybe could influence him, maybe not, because he also isn't the kind of person who allows others to influence him. Um, and then I I didn't know at the time, but I was hoping that I was going to be able to actually write some Markian in phase three. And so I was like, oh, okay, so just do some things for yourself here, Gratton, just in case you get to write one of these books that you want to write. Plant some things that then you can pluck out and actually put pins in when you're writing the book. So yeah, I liked doing that. There's one line, like a throwaway line in um, a closed fist, that I really, really didn't think I was going to get to keep because I think it is not like you can't tell what it's pointing at, but I know what it's pointing at. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. This is so exciting that this one little throwaway line of Marta's uh, is in the published short story. So little things like that.
Please tell us when the book comes out. Like this is if we don't all make the connection ourselves, please give us the hint of like, haha, did you see when I did that? Once everything's out in public in the future.
Yep. Next July.
Right. We'll circle back to this one.
Yep.
I have some guesses that I'll keep to myself, but
okay.
I love your point about the unreliable narrator, and I think of one line in here where Marta thinks to herself, "We make ourselves matter. If we don't, who else will?" And I feel like that is the Evereni at large. And I love how the story really focuses on the weight of what a name is as it relates to the Evereni and the meanings behind like each of the family names. And I think at one point it's talked about that when the Evereni die, their bodies no longer matter. It's just what their name is and how their name is remembered, that they carry that legacy forward. And I just think that's like awesome. Like, of course, the Rowe family are like these sort of like legends, way back when and even in current day. And Martian is even an elusive figure in phase one, and people can't really pinpoint who the I is. And I just think it's fascinating how they can kind of create their own, like you said, their own mythology. Like Marta always wanted or had a mythology that she lived by, and now she's kind of creating her own mythology of herself. And I think that's fascinating. Like, was it important to you to really focus on the like importance of legacy to tell Marta's story and to really like wrap it up in phase two? Was that like the logical final sort of focus for her character?
I think so, partly because that is like in a lot of ways the whole point of phase two is that the phase one and phase three are the legacy of good and bad, everything that happens in phase two, whether it's a big thing or a little thing, like huge battles or just little like butterfly moments and that kind of thing. And for Marta, because she is the like a literal and spiritual ancestor of the Eye of the Nile, it was really important to just really show, these few big moments in her life through Path of Deceit, Path of Vengeance, and then the short story, um, how she can so vividly create and recreate and recreate and recreate who she is, which is something that we also see the Nile in general doing, and Markian in particular, like doing that, like mirroring, even if he isn't really doing it on purpose a lot of times, how might the history unconsciously being affecting him. He knows a history that he is pursuing and a future he's pursuing, but what are these other ways psychologically and like relationship wise that he can't help and may or may not even always realize he is continuing this legacy.
The Avereni have a lot of trauma, a lot of generational trauma in that family.
I love the Evereni. It's so
Every
great.
time we get a lore drop, we're just like, yes, another lore drop. Let's go.
That was my second favorite part of writing the short story. Was there were there were a few little details about the Evereni that Charles had created for, I can't remember the name of the comic, but
Yes.
the one with
the
the
storm
planet. Yeah. Yes. I can't believe I forgot that. Um, but he had created some like beginnings of their lore, and there were a few little hints in like all of our master documents, behind the scenes kind of things. But really, I was given pretty much like a carte blanche to like dig deeper into that kind of stuff and really play around and have a good time. And I am a world builder. That's my favorite thing about writing fantasy. And I love even just, one of the things that I'll endlessly be frustrated with and with regards to Star Wars is the names. And that it's really hard to find naming conventions in Star Wars. And that's one of my fundamental, like, first things I do when I'm writing a book. I'm like creating a culture. Okay, how do they name each other? How do they name their children? Do they, get renames? Like all these kind of things is a really fundamental world building block for me. And so I was like, oh my gosh, that's the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to give the Evereni a naming convention.
Yes.
And I got to, and it was great, and I had a lot of fun with it. So
I noticed that in Path of Deceit, because we found out in that book that Marta Chi was the diminutive of her name from her like home planet. And then it was like Marta Chi, Marshy, it's like Martian. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, God, linguistics in Star Wars is so cool. And then here you're like playing with that idea again in the story. So I love that through line in your phase 2 work.
I want more of it, because I also was just thinking as you were talking about that with Timothy Zahn's latest Thrawn series. I feel like we got so much in the naming conventions of the Chiss, and I was like, I love these like these details. Yeah. Like, let me just eat this up. So yeah, that I took notes on all of that, of course.
Can't pronounce any of it though. That's for sure.
I can. Thank you. I listened to the audiobook. There was something so interesting that Brad, I'm going to steal this from you a little bit, but we were talking about the idea of home in Star Wars is one that's often complicated, because the Jedi were, they left their homes as babies. They were growing up in temples. I mean, this is still happening, obviously, hundreds of years prior in the High Republic. The Emereni lost their home entirely, kind of adrift. And then Marta has found a new home with the Path until she hasn't. The Nameless were taken from their home, which makes me want to just, stand on the mountaintop and be like, you guys, this is important. How would you like define the meaning of home in this era of the High Republic, if that's not too much of a question?
I think that is tied in deeply with it taking place on the frontier, where, in a lot of ways, a frontier is what makes it that is it is a fraught place between people seeking a new home and maybe people being displaced from their current home. And you've got that tension of, well, who is allowed to have a home? Who is powerful enough to take or make a home? Who, like, where's the justice in that? How do you go to a place where there may not be people, but there may be people, and explore and create relationships and like all this kind of stuff. Um, and so that is really woven through all of the phase two books, is that tension of, well, like, what's the Republic doing out here? What are their priorities? What are the Jedi doing out here? What are their priorities? What are the like colonists and settlers, and then like indigenous populations? What are all their priorities, and how do they come together in different ways, successfully and unsuccessfully? Um, so I'm not really sure that's in any way inherently specific to Star Wars, but we all tried to find ways to bring that into phase two of the High Republic. Like this age of exploration and the frontier and all of those things are really tied to the human experience and human history and like all these things that Star Wars engages with on a variety of levels in every era. um and it was I, I hadn't really thought about it in terms of home, but I do think that's a really good like key word when we're talking about the frontier and phase two in particular, because it's all so there's so much potential on the
Mm.
outer rim.
Yeah, I really started thinking about it when Isrin in this story tells Marta, you can't trust a home, everything falls away. And I'm like thinking of the imagery of like falling, and the Starlight Beacon is a home and that's falling through the
Mhm.
sky. And yeah, you mentioned like displacement. That's kind of the entirety of phase one, which is like you have the great hyperspace disaster, you have the
Mhm.
Republic Fair, which displaces all of Valo. And then the Starlight Beacon, not only that beacon itself, but the planet of Irem, which for a while
Mhm.
that the we see in some other stories in this book as well, the outfall, the outcome of that for those citizens. And then thinking of all the stuff that they've been through in phase two with the war between the two
Mhm.
planets. So it's like Star Wars is really just trying to find a home that lasts a while. I think of like the Bad Batch when they go to Pabu, that like
Mm,
nice
mm.
tropical island planet, and they're like, this could be a nice place. And it's like, is it going to last forever though? I want everybody to just settle down with like Mai Tais and just to like relax and have a couple of drinks and go to Star Peace.
Star Peace.
I find it really interesting in conversation with the Jedi specifically. Like as you were saying, they are taken from their homes and like not really allowed in a lot of ways to create a new home with the temple. And ideas of home are very fraught because of not only their greater mission, which is to be flexible and be able to move, but also philosophically and not um they're not supposed to create attachments. And like, what is home if not an attachment to at least a feeling? And so having them be sort of like on the vanguard, but also arbiters, and it's a very interesting dynamic. Yeah, I like thinking about the Jedi a lot, and I didn't think that I did. But, I thought I understood the Jedi pretty much because I've been thinking about them since I was 4 years old. And then when we were writing Path of Deceit, I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I have to really figure out what I think about the Jedi and their philosophy right now, and what it is and how it isn't, because I have to write a whole bunch of, like, arguments about the Jedi way and like the Force itself and like all these different things, and I didn't want anyone to be wrong. And so I really had to figure out my own Force philosophy, and it was really neat. I liked doing that.
I think that's what's so great about so much of the Star Wars stories we're getting in this real life time period. And I don't want to say like since legends became legends or any of that, but I'm mostly a reader of canon. So like as we've gotten to
Mhm.
dig into these sorts of ideas and canon stories that I've enjoyed, I'm always like loving when people pull back the layers on the Jedi a little bit. I'm like, no, there's a lot
Mhm.
going on with them. There's a lot to think about them,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of ways that people interpret them within the galaxy. So I really enjoyed that in Path of Deceit. I was like, oh, this is a little spicy, this is exciting. Like, because you were right. And like, in that sense, as we're hearing from Marta, she's not necessarily wrong in her point of view. She's just lived a different life that has led
Mhm.
her to different outcomes. So it's just interesting. So no question there. Brad, you take a question. I just had thoughts.
As we start to wrap up, there was one line in this story that I think kind of sums up maybe the legacy of Marta from like the reader point of view, but she says, the galaxy is not pretty. I used to believe the Force gives and gives and we give back. If I just gave enough of myself, I would be a part of something greater, loved, but the Leveler has shown me, the Jedi have shown me that the Force takes too. And it's such a like difference to when she was like all about gifts freely given, and now she's understanding that nothing in the galaxy is freely given. And I think that for both of us really cemented her story as more of a tragic one in many ways.
Mhm.
I'm sure Yana would think that if you asked Yana as well, who always feared this would happen to Marta, and here it is now. Now that you've had a chance to write Marta a couple of times, and now that we're closing the phase 2 chapter, like how do you just reflect on the character overall, and what do you take away from her now that you kind of get to go into the future?
I do think that it is a tragedy, partly because I know that even if she achieves, you know, any kind of peace after, the events of like the short story, we know where the seeds of what she's creating will lead, and it's bad. It's to bad things, you know, cruelty and destruction. And I think that she takes the lessons she's learned, well, she takes the wrong lessons from her experiences. She hears words from Isren, and she, has these experiences with other Evereni and then with other people in general. And because of her pain, she interprets them painfully instead of for the potential of, uh, you know, making the galaxy more beautiful, which is something she used to value. Um, so I do think that it is a tragedy. Um, and like in the sense of like Shakespearean tragedy, where characters end up in a tragic trajectory because of their fatal flaw, like that kind of thing. Um, and so I think she's great. I'm so happy and like honored that I got to play a significant part in creating who she is fundamentally, and setting her off on this tragic course, which at the same time it makes me really sad. I wish I could tell a different story where, she and Kevmo make it to Jeddah together and everything turns out differently because of that. Um, so that would make my heart happier, but ultimately wouldn't really serve the kind of storytelling we're doing, unfortunately.
Running to
um,
AO3 to write that thing.
right.
The happy ending version.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also have to highlight before we jump into a couple silly questions we have to finish here. Page 77, which generated the Tessa you legend comment from me, is where Marta, proposes to Velia, like, be with me for the rest of your life, and he's like, that sounds like a threat, and she's like, death is not what I want from you. I was at the library while reading this, so I was not audibly screaming, but I was screaming inside. And I just kind of want to highlight the claws forming a closed circuit of pain between us. And I just wanted to highlight that in your saying that like she uses the pain that she's experienced for pain. And there's nothing about this relationship that is happy. And I was just yelling inside my mind because I thought it was great and frustrating, but like, you know, in a satisfying as a reader sort of way. So I hope that other readers are just as screaming about that as I am. But kind of setting that up, how did you come about bringing like Vika and Velia, I believe I'm doing my best to pronounce it without having heard their names, into this story as ever any sort of peers that she meets?
I knew that I needed an Evereni who rejects her, and I needed an Evereni that sort of embraces her, or at least, you know, agrees to hang out for a while. And on a totally like practical level, I knew I needed to be like, oh well, you know, Marta's gonna have some babies,
right? At some point, we get to hear in the story,
right? I initially assumed it would just be one Evereni that rejects her and then one Evereni that stays with her. But I realized as I was building the story that it would be just much more dynamic for there to be two of them for starters, and for them to represent a two, like not a duology, but the way that Marta and Yana were both ultimately very Evereni, but in different ways. And then I wanted there to be this dynamic. And then I wanted Marta to, this is a major spoiler. I really wanted Marta to shoot somebody in the chest or in the face or whatever. Cause usually she has gone full Evereni. Like I use my teeth and my claws. That's what we do. I might use my sticks because it you know, it feels strong. But I wanted her to be like, you know what? Sometimes I just do what is most practical, and I'm furious and you took something from me and boom. And so it was really kind of a complicated process for coming up with Vika and Velia in particular, but only because of working out how to move all those pieces around so that it felt like a climactic moment in a very short story.
It did. It worked.
Yeah, I'm glad. And I needed it to be violent. And even like I got notes back the first time I sent it in, and they were like, "Can you make this worse?" And I was like, "I'm so glad you asked. I'd love to make it worse."
That's amazing. That's why the High Republic hurts so much. Is all the editor notes are just make it worse. Come on, make it more painful and hurt more.
Yeah. Can you describe this a little bit more gruesomely?
Sure.
Yeah.
I love how it's foreshadowed too earlier when they're talking. I think Marta's thinking about how the Twi'leks hunted Lilacs, and Lilacs would tear each other apart in displays of strength. And she's like, awful, yes, but hunting Evereni myself, I understood, you know. And it's like right there, and it's like a perfect just like bookend to the story. So I also appreciated that. So we have a couple fun rapid fire silly questions, I guess, to end the show on, which we typically do with all of our guests. So I'd like to preface the first question with we are very excited for Temptation of the Force, as well as Defy the Storm as well.
So much. Oh my gosh,
but as Elzar Man fans, we are very excited because we've seen a couple of your tweets about Elzar, and that makes us very happy. Sarah is a big K-pop person, so the tweet about Shiny about Shiny was very, very exciting, and I'm sure we will return to that at some point in the future if we ever have you back here. But we made a bet, and I told you about this at New York Comic Con last year before Path of Deceit came out. We made like a stupid bet that was like, hey, is Path of Deceit going to be about Dalna?
I lost.
And Sarah said no. Sarah lost the bet. I make fun of her forever. And then you and Justina wrote, hey, this is a book about Donna.
I just wasn't
and her
ready to
signed copy.
commit. I wasn't ready to commit. And then the announcement came out earlier than I expected about the topic of the book. It's on me, and I accept that.
So our rapid fire question is to help us like set up the next bet for Temptation of the Force. Is Temptation of the Force about temptation, and is it about the Force? That's our rapid fire question. Can you confirm nor deny?
I can confirm.
Excellent. No bets will need to be made. It's pretty
Awesome.
straightforward.
All right, we're on.
Yeah.
we got some context here for our next bet. So thank you.
Yeah,
Very
lots
big.
of different kinds of temptation.
Excellent.
Lots of different kinds of the Force.
Breaking news, heard it here first. That was our gotcha question. Okay, Sarah, ask the next question.
All right. One question that we've been having a lot of fun pondering in our mind, pulling out AO3 again, of course. If you could see any two characters that you've written have a conversation with one another about anything, who would you choose, and what would they talk about? They don't have to be from the same time frame. They don't have to ever have come across each other.
Oh my goodness. I'm probably gonna have to go with Sky Graf and either, I don't know, Xylan Graf or a Santeca, an unknown Santeca from Defy the Storm.
A future Santeca. Well,
future Santeca.
we can circle back on this one too.
Right. Yeah. I am super obsessed with the Grafs and Santecas and their whole dynamic, and I don't think that it is bad of me to say if it's a Tessa Gratton High Republic book, there will be Grafs and Santecas in it. Path of Deceit has the least amount of them. But mostly because of like plot requirements, not because I didn't want more. But I love how their families change, like very similarly to the Roe legacy. The Grafs and Santecas have like a parallel path into the future, but also like with very different priorities, and they end up in different spaces in phase 1 and then phase 3. So that would be my first answer. And my second answer would probably just be like literally anybody, and my sweet, sweet sunshine Kevmo, because he'll always be my first. So he is a special place in my heart. And I'm sad that I can't really write about him anymore for obvious reasons. So,
cries.
Yeah.
Salute emoji. Oh man, that was a rough one. I will say the Santecas are so funny to us because I feel like they're kind of a meme at this point, because I swear to God, every time a Santeca is in a Star Wars story, the Santeca dies. Like it's always like it's like in South Park. It's like in South Park when Kenny dies every episode. It's like every time there's a Santeca that dies. Like Sunshine killed one. Like Laura Santeca gets killed by Kylo Ren. Like they're just having a rough go throughout time.
I'll tell you, I was halfway through, I think, writing, this is very embarrassing for me, but I think I was halfway through writing Quest for Planet X, which has Santecas everywhere. And before I made the connection to Lore Santeca being a Santeca, and I was like, what? How is this even possible? I completely missed this. I've been working on the High Republic for over a year now, and I just didn't even notice the whole time people were talking about Marie Santeca and like Santecas in the future and like all the maps and everything. It just never connected. I never knew that guy's name from the really great opening of the Force Awakens.
He goes so quick.
Yeah, I mean, he's there and then he's gone. If you haven't, okay, I have to get on my tiny little step stool for just a second. Brad knows where I'm going. If you haven't read I think it's Charles Soule's Poe Dameron comic. Laura
Oh, I haven't.
Santeca is in that, and he introduces my favorite Glepshido item in all of Star Wars, which is the Kazerath device. He finds it in a cave. It appears in 2 issues of this comic, or not in a cave, in the Cato Nemoidia vaults. But yeah, he's like treasure hunting. It's really kind of interesting to put those, or like attempt to connect the threads. I don't think we have all of them yet as readers, at least, in seeing how they like evolve into the sequel trilogy era. But finding more out about both the Santecas and the Grafts it's been so interesting, because the characters that we've seen have been such characters, and I say that with so much love. So I'm really looking forward to getting more from them as well.
Sarah jokingly is like, we have so many Santecas in the High Republic. The Kazerath device has to show up somewhere, right?
That's
and
my like every
she's patiently waiting.
Thing I open, I'm like, will my thing return? Like, and the answer's like, no.
Charles Soule's like, I don't even know what that is. It was like 10 years ago. It's fine.
It's cool. I keep it in my heart.
Our last question here, which we ask every guest, is what does Star Wars mean to you? So taking all of your writing experiences, your experiences as a fan, what does it mean to you?
My answer is different now than it would have been even just 2 years ago, when it was really about my relationship with my mom and my family, and like it was my first real fandom. But now it really this word sounds really dry, but it really means collaboration to me. Working on the High Republic is so involved. There's so many authors and editors and content like creators. And then the readers who come in, and, like even before, like I saw fan art of Kevmo before Path of Deceit was even published. And like that kind of collaboration creates just something so special in person for me, both as a writer and a consumer of Star Wars media, which I of course still do by watching the other shows and reading some of the other books and things. So it really is a very unique collaborative space, and I'm really being fed by that creatively and like emotionally. So that's my current answer. Ask me again next year and I'll have a different answer.
Well, that is an excellent answer. I definitely, as a reader, sense that, sense of collaboration and community, just within the fan community within the High Republic. So yes, I definitely get where you're coming from there.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like it. Thank you for everything that you've written in the High Republic, and thanks for what you're currently writing, and hopefully we'll be reading very, very soon. We cannot wait, and we hope you come back at some point so we can talk more about Elzar Mann in the future.
Yeah, Elzar, my messy Elzar.
Yeah, he's just such a mess. Oh my gosh, I love him.
We love him.
But thank you so much for joining us on the show. It meant a lot to us. So where can our folks find you online, and what else do you have coming up that you want to talk about?
My website is just tessagratton.com, and it has links to all the places I am. I like to be on Twitter, but I'm less and less there. Instagram is the easiest way to be sure to find me. I have not only Defy the Storm, which comes out, I think, in March. Justina and I, our fantasy collaboration, Chaos and Flame, the sequel to that is coming out in May, and it is called Blood and Fury.
Okay.
Yeah. It is a duology. So it is like closing out the story of Chaos and Flame. And so I'm really excited about that. We're done with both of those books now. So like Justina and I aren't currently collaborating on anything. So part of me is like, who am I if I'm not writing a book with Justina Ireland? But and then I am really working hard on Temptation of the Force. I had a really great editorial call today, and I'm excited to dig back into that. And that is definitely all I can say about that.
Well, we're looking forward to all of these things. And I have regrettably not read Chaos and Flame yet, but it's literally at the top of my list. So yes, we will be tweeting about it, if nothing else, how excited we are about these books. So.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you again, Tessa. And until next time, may the force be with you.
Oh, may the force be with you.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and a special thank you to Tessa Gratton for joining us. We have a lot more around the High Republic coming out very, very soon, so be sure to be following us on all of our socials, including Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, you name it. And if you enjoyed the episode and want to hear more, make sure you're subscribed to us in the podcast platform of your choice, so all of our newest episodes drop right into your feed as we dive into Phase 3 Trials of the Jedi. And if you would be so kind and have an extra minute in your day, consider leaving us a 5-star written review. Helps other folks find the show and join the discussion, especially if you are a huge High Republic fan just like us. And lastly, we do have a Patreon where tiers start at just $1 a month, and it's a great way to support the show and keep the lights on for us. So special thanks to all of our patrons who make this show happen. That is all for this week, everybody. Thank you again so much for listening, and until next time, may the force be with you always.